Normally, I started to say the announcement of a new analog system I would have put at the very end of news, but then I realized, like, actually the last couple I don't think we've even covered on here.
Yeah, maybe not.
Because Analog has just kind of gotten into a routine of putting out kind of the same thing over and over.
Yeah,
just
sort of.
Fine.
Yeah.
You know, they did the NES and then the Super Nintendo and then the Genesis, and they're all like kind of more or less the same little...
The NES one is significantly more expensive.
Well, yeah,
that thing held its value because
you're talking about the very first
NT? The NT Mini.
Oh, okay.
The FPGA one, because the stuff they did before that was
the one they did before that was the one they like cobbled together out of original Nintendo hardware. That's right. I forgot about that. Anyway, this thing feels like the Analogue Pocket feels like enough of a big deal to talk about it right now.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
It is basically the same thing they've been doing for big consoles. It's FPGA based. It looks like a Game Boy, like it's got the form factor of an original Game Boy. Out of the box, it will play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. They're also going to put out cartridge adapters in the future for Game Gear, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and Atari Lynx. It's $200. It's got an incredibly high quality LCD screen.
Yeah, that thing looks
obscene pixel density.
Right.
It's a 1600 by 1440 screen at 3.5 inches,
which is like perfectly formatted for Game Boy.
Yeah,
stuff.
So that's hilarious. That's literally just a 10x res increase over the 160 by 144 resolution of the Game Boy. So you get like a perfect 10x scale on those games. But that's a pixel density of 615 pixels per inch, which like your average iPhone is like in the 300s.
Yeah.
Like it's an absurdly high-res screen for the size. And they basically say like that's so that they can do good scaling on any of the type of handheld games from any of those different consoles that you would want to play on this thing. But I think the biggest deal with this thing is it's got a second FPGA in it, and they are opening it up pretty widely, it sounds like, to third-party development.
So I think like a lot of the talk around this has been weird because they talk about it as a second FPGA open to development or whatever.
But apparently it's not two identical
It's not.
chips,
so
right? It's the second one.
Okay, this is my understanding of it from following people on Discord talking about it in some of these circles, some of these FPGA circles and whatnot, as well as some of the other interviews they gave to other outlets around there, that there was the Cyclone 5, which is the same chip that is the same FPGA that's in the previous analog hardware. It's also the same thing as in the Mister, the D10 Nano. And then there's a Cyclone 10, which is a newer chip, but it may be that the newer FPGA, but it may be smaller. So I don't know that they got out and gave sizes of these things, which in some cases the size or the model number of the chip determines the capabilities of it.
Yeah.
So my guess, what I've pieced together is it seems like the system level stuff, like a menu and all this other stuff, runs on one of those, and the cores of the game playing cores runs on the other one. It sounds like developers will have access to the more powerful of the...
Okay, that was my big question.
Yeah, the second FPGA for open source developers seemed like, well, wait, why do two?
Yeah.
It seems like because maybe they're reserving one for menu stuff, and then one is just open for whatever they want to do in addition to whatever open source development happens.
That still makes me wonder why they wouldn't just use a more traditional, like an ARM CPU
that's what the Mister
as a coprocessor instead of two FPGAs.
The Mister is built on that. There's a Linux backend behind all that stuff.
It just runs on the ARM.
Yeah, and then you've got the FPGA for the actual heavy lifting.
But we ain't no.
I don't know.
Programmers.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, I'm sure people will come up with interesting uses. For
even if
stuff.
it's just as simple as them being able to say continue to say no software emulation by not having a. It might just be like a marketing thing almost.
The ads, based on like interviews I've read with the main analog guy, I could see this like kind of intense devotion to principle.
Yeah,
being behind that.
Maybe that's what is driving it. I don't know. Anyway, the upshot of this is so these devices come out, and then traditionally, it's been a weird trajectory. The NT Mini came out, and it played NES games. And then suddenly, Kevin Horton, Kevtris, the guy that is now an Analog employee, he's doing all the coding for the FPGA cores for these units. He released an unofficial firmware for that added support for all types of other 8-bit systems. You know, like a lot of different platforms were suddenly supported on this device, loading off of SD card, all the other stuff. So the NT Mini became far more capable than just playing NES games. It was great. When they announced that they were going to do the SNES with the Super NT, I think the assumption, at least my assumption, was like, oh, it'll probably also play all those other ones.
Yeah. And maybe like all the other 16-bit stuff too. Like that was
maybe.
I was all set to buy a Super NT when they announced it because I was like, well, shit, this is going to do everything I want.
But that's not a way for them to sell more hardware.
Yes, but then they can't turn around and also make a Genesis equivalent, which is what they did.
Right. So the closest the Super NT got to that was unofficial jailbreak firmware. Came out that let you load games off of SD cards and dump carts and stuff like that. Very useful features in that unofficial firmware. Yeah. Why wouldn't you do it? All that other stuff.
But did not add other consoles to the list.
Precisely, yes. It didn't even add the ones that were added to the NT Mini.
Right.
And then the Mega SG came along, which is the same thing for the Genesis, but for the Genesis, there's an unofficial firmware there that lets you do that stuff. But again, they did not add other 16-bit or any other systems to that firmware in an unofficial capacity. So I didn't buy one.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it was just like, well, the Mr. plays Genesis stuff exceedingly well.
Right. Like that's why I have never.
There are tremendous open source alternatives now.
As soon as
to the Analog product line.
As soon as yes. As soon as the breadth of the Mr. project became apparent, like it killed any desire I had to buy any of the Analog stuff until this thing.
Because this is portable. It will have a dock. When it's docked, you can buy the dock and it will. Yes, more or less. You can output to a TV and use Bluetooth controllers. If it is in the dock. So the dock is sold separately.
Yeah, we don't know how much the dock is going to be yet.
I think it said $80.
No, they haven't announced a price yet.
For
the dock.
The DAC is. Oh wait, I'm sorry. The DAC is $80.
Oh yeah, the DAC. I'm pretty sure they said they will announce pricing details on the dock next year.
And this will be compatible with the DAC if you want to go out to an analog monitor or something like that through the dock. The dock can use the DAC.
Dock can use
DAC.
DAC.
But so I, like a device that runs Game Boy cartridge, there is zero scenarios where I'm like pulling out my Game Boy cartridges again to use them. Like it's just not. Yeah. I'm not going to carry that shit around.
Jan does.
I do.
Yeah, he does.
I do care.
I respect it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of devotion to principles, but
I got a ton of GBA games. Yeah. I'm just not going to dig through a box of them. I'm not going to carry them around. Whatever.
Yeah. Like if I got one of these things, I would probably put my original Game Boy Tetris cart in it.
Sure.
Never take it out.
Yeah.
Let it just stay there.
So when they say like, "Hey, we're going to sell cartridge adapters for Lynx games," they're like, "No, I'm not. No. I'm not going to do that."
I mean, it's cool for people that want it.
Yes, but presumably this will also
it has an SD card slot.
Of course it does. Yeah, but and you would like to think that like, okay, similar to the previous devices, there will be an unofficial firmware that allows loading off of SD.
Yeah.
And at that point, I am interested in Neo Geo and Lynx stuff because I'm just broken. I'm broken in that specific way where I occasionally want to play a goddamn Lynx game.
Jan's into.
I got a bunch of Game Gear games.
Jan's into Mons. You're into Biomotor Utatron.
Yeah.
We can find a compromise here.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Wait, that was Neo Geo, wasn't it?
Yeah, Biomotor Utatron. Yeah.
Yes.
And so that stuff is interesting, and also, what do other developers feel that they want to port cores that they may have written for Mister?
That is the big question.
Like, there's a lot of open source stuff out there that could theoretically be ported.
Like if this thing,
and also, by this having a slightly higher profile than a really wild project like the Mister does. Will it potentially bring in new people with FPGA skill that might code new cores that could then benefit a platform like the Mister as well?
Sure.
And I think that would be interesting if it attracted more core writers and stuff like that were out there doing stuff.
It's been
across the board, not just for the analog device.
I'm nowhere near as deep into that stuff as you, but I even have read, like, I think it was on Reset Era, there's a thread about the Mister, and you see people like, literally, I think I saw a guy saying like, yeah, I work on FPGAs in the defense industry by day.
Yeah.
I'm totally going to buy a D10 Nano and get in on this. Like, I'm going to start working on a core. Or I'm going to start contributing to.
There's a guy
people with the skill from other places, from their other sectors, are jumping in on the Mister.
That are just like, hey, cool, let's get into this. Like, there's a bunch of people are running Patreons saying like, hey, I'm going to port these cores and they'll be open source and whatever, but like if you want early access to them, we'll do this and do this. Like so there's just like a weird little cottage industry that has sprung up around the Mister in ways that have been pretty fun.
That stuff's awesome. I mean, I guess it remains to be seen until people get their hands on this thing exactly what it's capable of. But
exactly, I don't, and that's where I'm not technically minded enough to even tell you,
right?
Like, because I don't know which model, which type of the FPGAs they put in there, how many logic units they'll have to work with, all this other stuff. I don't know. That information is probably out there and available, but I have not retained it, so I can't tell you.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, that you can say it has a Cyclone 5 in it, but it might be less capable than what's in,
or it might be more. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just saying I don't want to assume it's going to like be able to handle all the stuff that runs on a Mister right now. But if it did,
because there's also RAM considerations too, like the Mister, and maybe this is something specific to the way the Mister operates that wouldn't be a problem here. Because again, like I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. When they wanted to get into the Neo Geo stuff, it became like, well, we need SD RAM. We need really fast RAM because all this stuff is so timing specific.
Right.
And so originally it was a 32 meg SD RAM was used for the SNES and Genesis cores and all this other stuff. Or not Genesis, SNES and a handful of other ones. And then they're like, well, we need to find a way to do 128 meg SD RAM
for all those Neo Geo
at a fast enough speed to fit all these Neo Geo games in. And they did. So I don't know what the RAM situation is on Analogue's device.
It's hard to imagine they have taken such kind of specific considerations into account.
I just have no idea.
Maybe they did.
I don't know jack shit about this stuff. At the end of the day, I know enough to fucking get a bunch of stuff wrong, probably. So
sure.
So that's where I'm at. But it's an intriguing device that I would probably that I would consider picking up.
It looks really nice.
It's sexy.
The design of it is really nice. I mean,
that music stuff tied into it too.
Nanooloop
ships with like a sequencer built in. You can do a bunch of
Nanooloop is a pre-existing sequencer for Game Boy and stuff like that has been around.
Yeah.
So that's a cool inclusion.
Yeah,
for sure.
But like even conservatively in a situation where let's say they got like the SNES and Genesis cores running on it. And that was it.
Yeah.
And this thing suddenly became a portable SNES and Genesis on top of all the other stuff it does.
Sure.
And if it could output all that stuff to the TV, like holy shit,
that's
could does the open development stuff read to you like they just are a little spooked by what the Mister is doing?
Spooked's probably not the word.
I think they're not afraid that it's like horning in on their.
I think maybe it is
territory.
I'll tell you specifically. I didn't buy their Genesis hardware, even though I think it looks fantastic. Because I have a Mister, so like, there's one sale. I don't know, but is it eating into it in a grand fashion? I don't know. How many people are even aware that Analogue makes these devices?
Yeah.
But then
it's
also,
like a rabbit hole inside a rabbit hole.
Exactly. So, but at the same time, the Mister is like a fucking deep ass rabbit hole of like, at some point you get into Linux scripts and all this other stuff that some people are just not going to have the mind for it. It's not that hard to wrap your mind around it, and people have made it very easy, but it is not a super user-friendly device from you assembling it by inserting boards in top of boards and all that other stuff, building it to the way the front end works today. And maybe they'll get to a point where they care about, that type of user interface and user experience on the Mister, that they overhaul it in a way that makes it a friendlier menu. I think that they could go down that road. But right now it's a case of like, okay, here's an example. You've got the official GitHub repository for Mister that has the vast majority of the cores, whether they're arcade games or consoles or whatever. Here's the SNES core. And there's just one file. It's like a .rbf file you download and run on the device. And so here's Pac-Man. Here's Rally X. Here's the SNES. They all come from that official repo. Now, on top of that, you've got cases where like, okay, the arcade games the ROMs need to be assembled in a very specific way. You need to find this MAME set, run this batch file to spit out this file that you then put in this directory on the Mister. So you need to be able to get file access to the Mister, and you got choices there. Do you want to do it over FTP? Do you want to pull the SD card out and copy it over manually? Do you want to do it over a Samba share? Are you using Wi-Fi? Do you want to run Wi-Fi scripts to get that stuff up and running? So that stuff just gets like people's eyes will just glaze over at that point.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, that goes without saying.
And then on top of that, you got cases where like Rally X can also run new Rally X. So now you're like, oh, I need to compile 2 ROMs for this one, and then I need to figure out where to put the second one. So when I hit load, it shows up right there very easily in the menu. And once you get it all up and running, it's easy, it's smooth. Like once you wrap your mind around the specific way the Mister stuff works, it's very easy.
Yeah.
I think anyone could do it at that point, but the steps to get there, there are a lot of hurdles that I think are going to scare a lot of people.
A lot of following tutorials.
Yeah.
And getting into the weeds.
And
this could be a more streamlined pathway to getting there.
Well, yes, but then also you've got a guy who is on Patreon doing cores for Commando and a lot of other Capcom games. Most of his games are not in that official repo. So if you want those games, you have to find that GitHub repo, pull the files yourself, and copy them over. And then set up, and he's named his stuff differently in a way that has his name. He's tagged them in a way.
Wow.
So it doesn't conform to the same naming structure as the stuff in the official repository. And so it is fucking Wild West on top of Wild West on top of Wild West.
Let's just say that UX is not a priority in this project.
Not right now.
At the moment.
Yeah, and I think that there's room for something like that to make it easier, but like to what end? Because like I said, assembling the hardware is still going to be too much for some people.
And it's all just changing too fast for that to be practical.
That too. And I think it's an amazing project. I really do. But that stuff will eventually limit its growth if that's something that people care about. Like it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. Who cares? It's awesome as is. If as long as people are working on it, then great, whatever. So the analog thing ends up being like potentially, if it ends up with many of those same cores for arcade games or however it ends up shaking out, maybe that ends up being a somewhat user friendlier way for people to access that stuff. And so that's the stuff that's like, okay, does that then undercut the Mister?
And that's what I was getting at, because even just with the portables that it supports out of the box, and again, let's just say Genesis and Super Nintendo, like that alone is such a huge bulk of the classic game library.
Yeah, and right now there are no...
That would be hugely enticing.
There are no cores, at least no public cores for the Mister that run Game Boy Advance or Lynx or Neo Geo Pocket.
Oh, wow.
So Kevtris must have written those completely from. Well, I think he deliberately doesn't look at the Mister source to stay clean. But yeah.
I mean, the big thing for me is like the nice screen, the portability, and the dock. Like,
yeah,
it's not just that this thing could replicate the functionality of a Mister. It's that it then also kind of acts like a Switch at the same time.
Right. And they've got the same stuff that they've had on some of the other devices, where like you want specific filters and stuff like that and the cores coded by other individuals will have access to that stuff as well. Those scaling and whatever other features that they put in the menu.
It's just exciting to see them kind of reversing course on the direction they've been going.
Well, I think it's a clean way for them to do it, right? Yeah. It feels like they've been very, since the days of the NT Mini, they've been reluctant to do like multi-system devices.
Yeah.
So even out of the gate, this is a multi-system device by design. And we'll see if they make good on the cartridge adapters. Like that's, they had originally talked about doing cartridge adapters for the NT Mini in some capacity, and that never materialized as far as I can tell. So I should go back and look. Maybe it did, but I, that stuff, because since that can run ColecoVision, all this other stuff, they're like, oh, we'll do this someday.
Yeah,
it's just never really.
ColecoVision cartridge adapter is a pretty niche market.
This whole thing is, though.
I know,
right?
But again, it's
someone's out there going like, I need to play the fucking Smurfs on ColecoVision. I need to play that game right fucking now.
That's a third order.
That's my
niche.
game.
That's what I'm saying. It's like that's an audience of one.
All right. It's not me. It ain't me.
The thing looks awesome. It got a bunch of attention when it got announced. It looks like it probably has the potential to become their most popular thing.
I bet.
And that could lead to a lot of cool stuff
Yeah, and it creates a situation where like I would like to see one of those, but at the same time, I'm interested in seeing what people do with it post-release. But because it will end up likely selling out, it becomes a situation where it's like, I guess I have to buy one of these at launch.
I was gonna ask, do they always only do limited runs of their stuff? Like,
no, the NT Mini is out of stock and has been for some time. I doubt they'll do another run of that thing exactly. Maybe they'll turn those guts into something that is not aluminum and expensive someday.
Right. But I mean, this thing, like, surely they're not just going to like do one run of it and then stop.
I doubt it.
Okay.
Unless the screens are hard to source, like who knows? Maybe there's some limitation there. Yeah. I don't know. It seems like a really cool device. Yeah. And like I said, I know just enough about this stuff to be dangerous, so I'm sure I got a lot of the tech stuff wrong along the way, but there you go. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool.